Thank you, everyone. Happy spring. This is our first Diversity Speaks for spring. Spring was Friday, March 20th. And I don't know about you, I am welcoming spring. It feels like it's been a long winter. So I hope everyone's doing well. And so we want to welcome you for the Women in the Fight for Reproductive Freedom with our council member, Kendra Brooks. So before we go there, Executive Director Lassiter wanted me to share how very fond of he is with Councilmember Kendra Brooks and the work that you are doing in City Council. He also wanted to mention that you all grew up together. He's very proud of that fact of growing up together in Philly, and he wants to extend his regards to you and also to everyone who's here today. But that he is there at the Capitol for Lobby Day today. We know that we're an enforcement agency, we're a legislative agency, and so that's important work that we are doing and we continue to do here. So welcome everyone, and of course we want to extend the welcome, especially to Council Member Kendra Brooks. So thank you for being here today. Kendra Brooks is the minority leader of Philadelphia City Council. She is a council member at large from North Philadelphia and the first Working Families Party member ever elected to City Council. She has a background in organizing for social movements, public school advocacy, gun violence prevention, and restorative justice, all of which inform her priorities as an elected official. Some of her recent accomplishments include the POWER Act, which grants new rights and protections to low-wage workers, the nationally acclaimed eviction diversion program, and the end for profit evictions in Philadelphia, the Reproductive Freedom Task Force and historic funding for reproductive healthcare providers, and expanding mobile crisis teams for mental and behavioral health, and also protecting neighborhood-led community gardens. It's an honor to have you here with us today for our last session of our Women's History Month event. Please give a warm welcome to Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. And to your director, Lassiter, when we talk about Women's History Month, I have to give a shout out to his mom, Marilyn. She is a phenomenal woman with a huge personality. So I'm not sure if he still carries his mother's personality, but she was a dynamic part of my life growing up at Triumph Baptist Church. So if she's watching or he can let her see this, let her know that I love her. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Women's History Month. I am so glad to be joining you today to celebrate our history and to reflect on the work that still needs to be done, especially as it relates to reproductive rights. I want to start with a little bit about my own story and how women's history has informed the work with me as a community organizer and as a minority leader in Philadelphia City Council. My work in politics grew directly out of my own experiences as a mother, as a grandmother, and as a Black woman in Philadelphia. I first got involved back in 2014 when the school district was planning to close my children's elementary school and turn it into a private charter operator. I organized with other parents. We demanded that the school district take our voices into account, and we stopped the district from closing our school. From there, I got involved with movement groups in our city, focusing on education justice and gun violence prevention. And in 2019, I ran for office. I ran for city council as a member of the Working Families Party. My platform was based on my own experiences with education, housing, and healthcare, and all the barriers that I face and the people in my community face when it came to getting access to things that we needed for our families to be successful. When I won my election, it was the first time that a Working Families Party candidate had ever been elected to Philadelphia City Council. To be clear, I never expected that I would actually be elected to City Council. And starting my first term, it was very overwhelming. I learned that in order to survive, I needed to take the strength from the women who came before me. In particular, I needed to draw on the strength and wisdom of the working class Black women who came before me and who forged the way for me to win my seat on council. So I filled my office in City Hall with images of my sheroes. Some of them you maybe see the bottom of the posters behind me, but those women are Ella Baker, Asada Shakur, Shirley Chisholm, Harriet Tubman. And those women helped me stay focused on my own power and my purpose in city government. So, women's history is extremely important to me, and it plays a role in all my decisions on council, whether it's legislation to protecting the rights of domestic workers on the job or a campaign to win more funding for reproductive health in the city budget. One of my favorite traditions since I came into City Hall is recognizing and celebrating history making women with City Council resolutions. We know too many women who are literally holding our communities and our social movements together. They never get the recognition that they deserve. And once I got into office, I wanted to change that. So throughout the year, my staff and I seek out women who are doing the work, often unpaid work, to organize and advocate for our communities. We write resolutions to acknowledge their achievements and contributions. And then in February and March, for Black History Month and Women's History Month, we invite them to City Hall to be recognized. It's a way for our city as a whole to say thank you to the women who have been quietly doing the work for decades. And they don't do it for recognition. In fact, they often don't want to be recognized. But it's important to me to give them their flowers and make sure their names and achievements are recorded in our city's history. I want to focus on reproductive rights and the long tradition of Black women who fought for us to have the freedom and control over our own bodies. So, first, I want to talk about Angela Davis because she is definitely one of my sheroes. Angela Davis is a feminist, a socialist, and a revolutionary political leader. When I was a child, she ran for vice president of the United States with the Communist Party. She was a Black woman running as a third party candidate, and she later went on to help create and lead a new political party in the United States. That obviously made a very big impression on me. Angela Davis changed the narrative about reproductive rights when she insisted that it had to be bigger than just the right to have an abortion. She wrote about all the ways that women were forbidden for controlling their bodies and their futures. To be clear, that includes rape and separation from children during slavery. It includes the forced sterilization of Black and brown women. And it includes poverty and lack of health care, which prevent women from providing for themselves and their children. She challenged feminists to think beyond the right to have abortion, which was an issue that was most important to affluent white women, and to embrace a more holistic understanding of reproductive health and freedom. For Angela Davis, it wasn't about being for or against an individual person's right to have an abortion. It was about the overlapping systems of racism, classism, and capitalism that make it harder for women and children to survive and thrive. Not just during a pregnancy, but for all the time before pregnancy and all the time after. That lesson still resonates today. Abortion is important, but it cannot be the end of the story. To be clear, I see abortion as a human right. As a young woman, a young mother, I had an abortion, and it was my right to do so. I can't imagine my life if I had not made that decision over 30 years ago. And I have no regrets. And I'm unapologetic about it. I refuse to allow the next generation of women to be shamed, to be isolated, or even criminalized for making a decision about their own bodies. At the same time, I know that if we focus exclusively on abortion, we are leaving a lot of people out of the conversation. And in this fight, we need to include everyone. We need everyone on board. We need to recognize and show that access to reproductive care impacts all of us. Abortion is a polarizing issue, and the opposition to abortion is being used as a weapon to defund a whole spectrum of care for both women and men. If anti-rights people succeed in banning or defunding abortion, they will not stop there. They will come for our birth control. They will come for our STI testing and treatment and everything else that we rely on. In addition to Angela Davis, there were many other women, Black women, who advanced and expanded our idea about reproductive freedom. In 1978, there was a stark disparity between infant mortality rates in Oakland, California. In East Oakland, which is predominantly Black, 26 out of every 1,000 babies died before their first birthday. Nearby, in a primarily white suburb of Piedmont, that number was only 4. In response to this crisis, Erica Huggins of the Black Panther Party called a public meeting. After the meeting, 2 Black doctors, Melanie Tervalian and Vicki Alexander, took the lead in addressing the issue and created the Coalition to Fight Infant Mortality. They launched a community-based investigation, organized community members, and succeeded in winning additional funding and new leadership in the city's public hospital. Their names are not very well known, but their work was revolutionary. And there are some unsung heroes of our movement. About a decade later, in 1994, 12 Black women gathered in Chicago as part of a women's health conference. They built on the work of Angela Davis and the Coalition to Fight Infant Mortality, and they created a new term, reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is a combination of 2 ideas, reproductive rights and social justice, and it includes a broad range of issues that impact women's lives, from contraception to prenatal care to sex education and safe housing. It includes everything that a parent needs in order to provide a safe, supportive environment for their children. And it includes the right not to have children at all. I want to pause there for just a moment to share a short video with you about the history of reproductive justice.
Reproductive justice is a movement and a framework. That's what makes it so unique. 12 Black women in 1994 came together at a time where healthcare reform was at the top of the conversation across the nation. And there were so many conversations around what would it mean for our communities that were historically the ones pushed to the margins and the furthest away from the access that we needed for our bodies and for us to be able to live and thrive in the best possible ways. What would it look like for us to center our needs in this conversation? And so they organized, because that's what Black women do. They organized themselves and they put a call out to Congress, letting them know that they needed to trust Black women, that they needed to listen to Black women. And these Black women named themselves Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice, thus the first time the term ever being used by these 12 Black women and all of the folks that they organized. Now this movement is led by powerful people of color all across this country, all moving in a more intersectional, a more human rights-based framework of the ways that we talk about bodily autonomy for our communities, because we know that we are unique in so many ways. And so this movement and this framework gives us the language, and it gives us the ability to organize in a way where our people can see themselves reflected so that we can build as much power as possible.
Throughout the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, Black women were making history on these issues, but their work continues today. And we have Black women leaders right here in Pennsylvania who have taken up the mantle. And I'm thinking about one of my friends and colleagues, State Representative LaDasha Mays out of Allegheny County. Before she was elected to office, Representative Mays was an organizer and co-founder of New Voices for Reproductive Justice, an organization focused on reproductive justice for women, Black queer folks, and Black marginalized communities. When she got to the State House, she joined with colleagues to create the Black Maternal Health Caucus. The caucus has successfully passed legislation to expand Medicaid coverage for doula services and to create a statewide public awareness campaign on perinatal and postpartum depression. Through their advocacy, they have engaged thousands of Pennsylvania with events for Black Maternal Health Week and secured $30 million in state funding for maternal health. From what I understand, Governor Shapiro has included an additional $1.7 million for maternal health in his budget proposal for this year. And I know that a portion of that goes towards Birth Justice Philadelphia, which is a grant program for small community-based organizations focused on maternal health care here in the city. Black Maternal Health Caucus was founded because of higher rates of death for Black mothers and babies. But the law they have passed and the funding they have won does not benefit Black women alone. It improves access to health care everywhere in the state, including rural areas where some women have over an hour away from the nearest hospital. This year, they're hosting events for Black Maternal Health Week on April 13th and 14th in Harrisburg. And here in Philly, we will also be hosting events for Black Maternal Health Week, including a community baby shower on April 11th. And I'll be sharing some more details on these at the end of the presentation. All of these Black women, from Angela Davis to Latasha Mays, are leaders in the fight for reproductive justice. They are activists, they are organizers, and they are deeply rooted in the communities that they serve. They all bring a working class Black feminist perspective to their work. And that perspective has been key in shifting the narrative, changing the law, and winning real resources for reproductive health. And that is the lens I use for my work in City Council. During my first term in City Council, we learned about the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. That decision impacted me on multiple different levels, as a woman, as a parent, and as a legislator. At that time, I decided to share my own story about getting an abortion when I was a teenage mom, working full-time, and in college. There has always been a lot of shame about abortion, and I wanted to push back against the shame and the stigma. And the best way to do so is by speaking out. My party, the Working Families Party, joined with movement groups in the city to organize a march throughout our city. Thousands of people took to the streets, and I remember marching side by side with one of my daughters. As a legislator, I joined forces with two other women in City Council at the time, Councilmember Jamie Cartier and former Councilmember Helen Gim. We worked together to pass the Reproductive Freedom Platform so we could protect reproductive rights at a local level. The legislation updated our city's anti-discrimination and privacy laws to protect patients and providers at work, in the courts, and on the internet. That was an important example for me of how we can take back some control when the federal government is trying to dismantle our rights. We think of the federal government and the Supreme Court as these dominant forces, and they are very important, of course. But we should never forget about our own power to pass legislation locally and protect the people in our own communities. Now that we're in this Trump's second term, we are facing a whole new range of threats. And in Philadelphia, we are finding ways to organize locally and defend against these national attacks. As part of our legislative platform, we created a Reproductive Freedom Task Force made up of legal patients, providers, organizations, and government agencies. Through the task force, we are able to identify emerging threats, coordinate it with one another, and win municipal funding for groups doing on-the-ground work to defend the access to reproductive care. With the cuts and chaos around Medicaid and Title X funding, we decided as a task force that we wanted to hold a hearing in City Council to better understand the impact on patients and providers. I introduced the legislation to authorize a hearing, but that hearing was held up in council without a good reason. So we decided to do it ourselves. We organized a people's hearing on reproductive health outside of City Hall. We held it in the evening so working folks could attend. We provided food and childcare, and we invited members of the task force and the audience to share their challenges that they're facing and what they are willing to do to get funding restored. The people's hearing was a powerful experience. We heard from young people, from doctors, from people with disabilities, and people left with clear action steps on how they can continue to put pressure on local government to fund reproductive care. And that includes a lobby day in City Hall and our own event on Black Maternal Health Week in April. From California to Harrisburg to Philadelphia, Black women have been organizing locally, standing up for their communities, and redefining the fight for reproductive rights. I am extremely proud to be a part of that history and to have a chance to share it with all of you today as part of this Black History Month celebration. We would love to hear from people on a call about efforts underway in other parts of Pennsylvania. What are some of the challenges that folks are facing, and what strategies are you using to defend reproductive rights and advance the reproductive justice in your area? I can't see.
Thank you. Councilmember Brooks, is that a question you're asking? Brooks, all right. So feel free to answer the question if you want to answer that question in the chat. I know in the Pittsburgh area where I'm at, Tasha Mays is very active in that area, as you mentioned, of reproductive justice here. Open. I work with the civil rights our outreach, and so I'm always interested to hear how people, especially in Philly or just in other places in our state, are engaging with the community. So when I hear about you doing the people's hearing, I love that, and even hearing about the action steps that were taken afterwards, as far as lobby day and in the event that's happening in April. So that was really great to see that, and even to see the intergenerations.
I want to kind of insert the fact that for me, the most impressive thing about the task force and the hearing is that young people are included. For us to get to the outcomes for the task force, we had 2 high school students that were actively involved in the process from beginning to the end. And that's why it was important for the people's hearing to make sure we had the voices of some young people talking about school-based health resources, talk about teenage pregnancy and so many other things, because we have to look at the big picture and we have to include the next generation of women as part of the conversation. I was saying that I felt like we got caught sleeping, right? I never thought that I would be fighting for rights that my grandmother or my mother had got put into place. And then here it is going to be eliminated for my children. And I think the significance of us continue to make sure young people are included in the conversation is so this will never happen again. And we all are part of Women's History Month, and we all have to do our part to make sure that the messaging around reproductive justice, reproductive freedom, and reproductive rights, aren't just buzzwords, but they're action words. Because healthcare of women is important. Healthcare is important in general, but with administrations like the one that we're under, we see everything that affects women and kind of allows for us to thrive and grow is under attack. And we all play a part in making sure that the future for the next generation of women and birthing folks is intact.
it was really good to see that. Really good to see the younger, that intergenerational piece of it. I think is really important moving forward and now. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Very important. Any questions? Any other questions? I also wanted to ask while we have any other questions or comments in the comments. So feel free to raise your hand or put your questions or comments in the chat. You also mentioned the defending rights on the internet. I was curious, Councilmember Brooks, how do you all defend the rights on the internet? What does that look like as far as you mentioned that in your presentation? I was curious as to what that looks like.
Yeah, so when you look up certain data on the internet, they were sharing information was then affecting women in different areas and being prosecuted for information they put in system or list that they may be on. So we need to
Mhm.
make sure that we were protecting people's information and data from
Ah,
being shared that could potentially put them at risk. You never
mm,
think about how information is being used when we're using the internet, but those are some of the things that we found that they were attacking people and their rights
mhm,
on. So we wanted to make
mhm.
sure that you were protected here in the city of Philadelphia.
Or what the kiddos will say, doxing. I mean, your personal
Right.
information and spreading it or is no longer confidential to you. All right. Thank you. I was wondering if that meant from the sense of information that may be incorrect, making sure it is correct, factual information. But thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
One of the things about this advocacy and why these organizations that are a part of the reproductive task force are so important because we need to make sure that trusted messenger organizations like a Planned Parenthood and like so many others are still available to give useful information out to, young people in general. I think about in my generation, Planned Parenthood was a lifeline. Like I could go and get all the information I need, collect all the pamphlets. I'm kind of dating myself, all the
The
pamphlets, and
phone
get the
book.
yeah, and then give them out to my friends in school whose parents may not have given them as much freedom as I had. Um, just imagine if that information wasn't available, or we don't have trusted sites like a Planned Parenthood where you can get that information for free. How does that affect healthcare for young people? And this is both boys and girls, or women and men.
And I think the stigma is that when you think Planned Parenthood, you think one particular procedure, and I think that is a lot of the stigma of when we hear that organization that we think is just the procedure of abortion, but we don't think of all the other plethora of other services and procedures that happen, information that is given from organizations that you think of reproductive health. You think of the Planned Parenting, you think of the information of access of sex education, which is needed, which is not, you don't really hear that. I
Mhm.
remember getting sex ed in high school. I don't know if anyone else got sex ed in high school. I don't know if anyone wants to raise their hand. Who got sex ed in high school? I know I did. But I don't, my kiddos, I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, they don't get sexual education or anything like that in high school. I know my 15-year-old, they don't have that. It's just information that we're not getting anymore.
And I think about the STI screenings, cancer screening, like so many stories of women that went to Planned Parenthood for just a basic treatment or a basic test resulted in them having some form of cancer that would not have been detected had they not went to Planned Parenthood. They would have never went to ask their parents about going to see a OBGYN for whatever reason.
Right.
And here it is. They had the services available to them. And, some had been diagnosed with cervical cancer or a few other cancers. Just imagine if those services weren't available.
Right.
So Planned Parenthood does serve a life-changing purpose for so many people.
Yeah. Someone's mentioning, oh, I went to Catholic school, so we learned about natural family planning only. LOL. Yeah. We had sex education, but parents had to sign permission slips for us to take it. Okay. Yes. Correct. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Absolutely. I've used Planned Parenthood many times for routine services. Honestly, abortion care in Pennsylvania is still regressive and restrictive. We're getting to a place right now where, yeah, where you live matters. What state you live matters when it comes to reproductive care at this point.
And I just want to
That's
add,
scary.
I'm sorry.
Good for it.
So abortion is still legal here in Pennsylvania, but to that point, there's so many rules around getting it. I think you have to go in with 24 hours and have some kind of a meeting with someone, counseling services before the services can be provided. There's so many obstacles that are being put in the way right here in Pennsylvania, and we have to keep that, forefront in our mind. Although we can still have them here in Pennsylvania, there are a lot of rules and regulations around it. And we shouldn't continue to make it harder. And I just want to add to that because, this is it's a whole gamut of services that are being affected by the decrease in funding. And it's like I said, the family planning piece is one, just routine treatment is another. Abortion is a small portion of it. Just how can we make sure that healthcare for women is secured? And I think, like I said, this is an all hands on deck issue. And I think sometimes just because it's illegal in Pennsylvania, it is legal. The way I said that is one word. Just because it is legal here in Pennsylvania, that does not mean that we don't have work to do.
Sure. Thank you. Now, does your does that work with even the mortality rate of women with childbirth? Does it reproductive health have any work in that area as well?
Yeah, so keep in mind, we have to make sure people are doing their uh, prenatal visits, all of
Mhm.
these things are included. And sometimes Planned Parenthood is the referral source, or some of the school-based clinics are the referral source for women when they're diagnosed or when they realize that they're pregnant. What are you going to do? The next step is getting adequate care, and adequate prenatal care, which is very important to both the mom and the child. And I think we forget that these routine appointments that we go to are very important to make sure that women have access to the care they need immediately. Even if I think with my insurance, to get an appointment with my OBGYN, it's 30 days. Like, it's not like you're going to get an appointment tomorrow. However, some of the places, Parenthood and so many other clinics here in Philadelphia, you can get a walk-in. And we can't take those things for granted. That's why this funding is so very important.
Yeah, yeah. I think someone was just mentioning a comment of Florida, and I think they do not allow
Right.
reproductive, abortions in Florida. Reading about a situation in Florida, Pennsylvania, something like happened. Teresa Doyley in Florida, she refused a C-section, preferring a VBAC. During labor, a tablet was wheeled up to her bed where she was hooked up to IVs. She was informed that she was in court. She was denied an attorney or ombudsman. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge did not immediately order a C-section, but doctors could operate later in emergency without her consent. Or it was, discussed. So,
Wow.
yeah, so there's a lot going on with the women's health and their bodies across our nation right now. It's always been a hot topic when it comes to women's bodies and the autonomy of our bodies, even outside of reproductive health, right? But it's always been interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Hadn't heard about that. Yes, thank you. Anything else? And thank you so much, Councilman
Thank you so
Member Brooks, for sharing. This is an interesting topic. I think it's a very I don't it's provocative. It seems whenever we're talking about bodies and talking about another body within a body, right? But when it comes to reproductive health, I don't personally, I don't think it's too provocative. I think it's very cut and dry for me. But I know that this can be a provocative topic. But thank you so much for having a courageous conversation when it comes to this, because we are very much in an interesting point in our country. I never thought I'd see this day either, when our federal government will be doing something that's oppositional state governments when it comes to this topic. But thank you for being on the front line of this and working in this space. And thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my honor to be able to lead on this work and to be able to work with so many other dynamic women that are working around, Black maternal health and just healthcare for women in general.